Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Manitoba. I'm Marcy Markusa, and we have been talking a lot on the podcast about tariffs and trade. But today we're actually going to take you practically to a manufacturing floor of a business in Manitoba to really get a sense of how serious this issue with the States could be. So that space that we're taking you into is a place that you probably have heard of before, Loewen Windows and Doors. They've been around for decades and decades. They manufacture their products in Manitoba, in Steinbach, but around 85% go to the U.S. That's a big number. CBC's Zubina Ahmed spoke to President and CEO Neil Fast about how a tariff would impact his business.
The greatest challenge with any sort of upcoming tariff is the uncertainty that it introduces into our supply chain. With our customers who may order and work on their homes months, if not years in advance, to upstream to our suppliers of aluminum and softwood that may be impacted by tariffs coming into Canada. It introduces so much uncertainty in all areas of the business. So it instantly makes our products much more expensive in the U.S. It may make our dealers less profitable. It will certainly make Loewen less profitable. And the worst case scenario is, of course, customers choose to buy from some other location. I think the tariffs can affect the business in a couple of different ways. As our products become more expensive, certainly we will sell less in the United States and make up for it by selling more in other areas. Our profits may go down, and that will potentially reduce the amount of cash that we would be able to reinvest in the business in the coming year. So we are doing several things to help mitigate the impact of the tariffs. We are certainly increasing the frequency of our shipments down to the United States while there are no tariffs in place. We are looking at sharing the cost of our tariffs with our dealer network and with our partners. We are, of course, managing expenses closely in the business so that we can be prudent while times are so uncertain.
What about your workers here? Like, how are they feeling? Are they concerned, with this whole situation? Are they concerned that there could be some layoffs or not?
Of course they're concerned. We work really hard to communicate with our employees. Yesterday, we brought everybody together for a message. We had more conversations today as situations will change. Loewen has been through a lot in the past 120 years. 2010 was incredibly challenging with the banking crisis. Certainly a inconsistent trading partner will be frustrating for a business, but we've been through worse, and this certainly won't bring us down.
And do you think that you would have to lay off some of your employees if there would be like tariff imposed, do you think?
It's certainly possible, but there are several other actions that we're taking, and that would certainly happen first before we would look at layoffs. We have incredibly skilled employees, and frankly, we would not want to lose a single one of them to layoffs if we have any other choice. Certainly the biggest challenge in Canada is the amount of interprovincial trade barriers. By some estimates, they are as damaging to the Canadian economy as a 25% tariff. We have different adoptions of energy codes in different provinces. Our tradespeople, our healthcare professionals have different certifications. Of course, there are challenges shipping products like alcohol across the border. If our provincial governments and federal governments could work together to addressing all those issues, it will make buying locally Canadian-made products much easier for everybody.
The Premier is also talking about Trump-proofing the Manitoba economy. What would that mean for Loewen?
The Manitoba economy and Loewen particularly, we will always be strongly influenced by what happens to the U.S. As we can work to selling more into other provinces, selling more to countries other than the U.S., Loewen would certainly jump at those opportunities.
And since there would be a lot of profit losses, you mentioned, and 85% of your exports go there, are you thinking of looking at other export markets other than the U.S.?
Certainly. So we export to the Caribbean already. We still have small businesses in the United Kingdom and Japan left over from when we were shipping much more there in the 90s. There are certainly other markets that Loewen could export to. We would love to sell more in the Canadian market. We will certainly be bringing attention to our Canadian brand in the coming months and coming years. And yes, any product that we can move away from unreliable trading partners into Canada, we would appreciate it. But we have a wonderful relationship with our U.S. customers. We are committed to the U.S. business for the long term, and we have no doubt that particularly tariffs at the levels that were threatened a few days ago, those are not something that will be in place permanently. Trade is one of those wonderful things that everybody wins. There doesn't need to be a winner or a loser in bilateral or trilateral trade, and Loewen and frankly many other Steinbach businesses and Manitoba businesses have really benefited from that. And it benefits the U.S. consumer, it benefits Canadians, and we fully expect to see that going forward.
What are the alternate ways of doing business with the U.S.?
Lots of Manitoba businesses have manufacturing facilities in the United States. That's something that is challenging for Loewen. We have an incredibly skilled workforce and a very high quality handcrafted product. It would be incredibly challenging to move everything that you see in this factory down to the United States. We think that we are at our best producing here with such a great team and then shipping down to the US.
That's Neil Fast, President and CEO of Loewen Windows and Doors, speaking to CBC's Zubina Ahmed about tariffs. Well, we're talking about all this, of course, in a 2025 context where there's free trade and we're so connected globally. However, what can we learn from the past? Next on the podcast, Len Kuffert, who is University of Manitoba history professor, to give us some insight in past trade and tariff wars between Canada and the States. And good morning to you.
Hi, Marcy. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Really curious about this event you're having. Why don't we get right into it? I mean, how common are tariff wars, trade wars between the States and Canada?
Well, wars might be a little bit extreme of a way to put it, but there certainly were these periods of escalation between the two nations, and the probably the most prominent examples were in the later 19th century, from about the late 1870s onward, and really through to the First World War. There were tariffs that both nations had up against each other. They almost got to a free trade deal in 1911, but that was killed. And then in the Great Depression era, so 1930, the Americans put up a wall, much like Trump is threatening to do here, or has threatened and is continuing to do so. And Canada had to respond or retaliate. And the results of that, or the outcomes, were not really good for either side. Since Confederation, I won't go back further than that, but really since Confederation, there's always been a kind of push and pull in terms of how closely or how strongly the nations track each other's tariffs and duties. And so when the one puts duties higher and tariffs higher, the other one will respond. And we're living now, or we have been living since the late 1980s, since the free trade agreement between Canada and the US, and then Mexico as of the early 90s. We're living in a kind of era of relative calm, or relative kind of backing away from those extreme measures. So many of your listeners probably will think, or be reacting as they should probably to this prospect of tariff war with, quite a bit of trepidation and what is going to happen. And while historians can't really predict what's going to happen, we can certainly say that the 1930s result, or the 1930s efforts to have a trade war, a tariff war, didn't really work out for both sides.
Who starts it usually?
Who starts it of the two?
Yeah.
Well, in the case in 1930, it was the Americans, and that was the Hoover administration, who decided, okay, well, things are going badly. Stock market has crashed in late 1929. Hoover was in office and said, let's try this. It's in a way, I wouldn't hesitate. I would hesitate to say rather time honored, because the history of these kinds of things is really based on a simplistic understanding of how nations trade, and so it's really a kind of blunt instrument. But in the case of in 1930, the Canadians were the responding party,
same as now,
retaliated, and didn't work out so well.
Is part of your discussion today, Professor Kuffert, going to also be about the 2025 context of this, which is of course global trade? The difference from looking at history and today. I mean, global trade is so intrinsically, the markets are so intertwined all around the world now. And obviously with the internet and the way we're connected, that taking those apart, seems sort of unfathomable to people. So that's a massive critical difference now.
Yeah, and so many of the goods and the wealth that is transferred is done sort of electronically now. We are maybe stuck in a metaphor of things moving physically across borders quite often. But yeah, I think you used the right term there, sort of integration and intertwining of economies, and that's the operative thing. That's the thing that has really changed since, especially the 1990s and the advent of the World Trade Organization, for example, which is a kind of set of relationships in a way between nations that there are rules involved in trade, but they are not generally kind of punitive in the way that tariffs are, or an attempt to shut out goods from another place in the same way.
What do you, we highlighted the differences there, obviously, but what lesson do you think is most important to take away from the history books right now?
Oh, gosh. That nations are better off maybe specializing in what they can sort of do better. So, for example, it's really hard for nations to make everything to suit their own needs. And I think it's a bit of a fantasy for a nation like the United States to think that they can just, again, put up these tariff walls and their economy will all of a sudden spark to life where they found it wanting previously. Canada, for example, is not a nation that is, has a lot of citrus growers, for example. So we import that stuff from the United States, and that kind of recognition that some nations do some things better is important, and likewise, the Americans need to understand that perhaps softwood lumber, which has been a perennial thing that they contend with and has been fought over for decades, is something that Canada tends to be able to produce more cheaply and to allow that that commodity to move more freely. So putting up these kinds of restrictions is always a kind of wishful thinking exercise, and that doesn't often work out very well, and tends to be inflationary. I think Trump particularly won his election in November on the back of fears of inflation or scapegoating the previous administration for the inflation that was still kicking around, and these kinds of moves are going to be inflationary.
When you look in the history, we've seen that as well, right? Like when you're talking about, previous to the Great Depression, the trade war between Canada and the States that you were highlighting there, some economic historians say that trade war, is this correct? Tariff war deepened the impacts of the Great Depression?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because it did nothing to employ more people. It drove down consumption in general, because if people are laid off, they can't afford to have more stuff, like buy more stuff. They're going to just focus on the necessities, and any costs that are increased by tariffs are going to be borne by the consumer. And that's the real misconception I think people have about tariffs. They don't understand that it just largely passed on from the importer of those goods to the consumer, because the importers aren't going to be able to turn any sort of profit if they just eat that cost of the tariff.
Well,
and that's, Go ahead.
No, I was just actually going to wrap us up and say if people have more questions or want to understand this more, this is open this afternoon, this discussion that you're having. It's not. I apologize. I was told it was open to all.
Yes, yeah. No, absolutely open to everybody.
Okay.
But it is tomorrow afternoon.
Oh, pardon me. Okay, excellent.
It's the 6th. Yeah.
I'm glad I said that. I have that incorrect on my script. So isn't it good that we that we had this exchange on the air, Professor Kuffert?
And we have 3 brilliant colleagues of mine that will be there, and I'll be there too, to also to weigh in on the Canadian side. So we've got I think a good mix of people, not just Canadianists, not just Americanists, that are going to be talking about it. So public welcome, obviously. Yeah, no problem.
Excellent. Thank you so much for being with us via Zoom to set up tomorrow's event for us, and enjoy your discussion when you get to it.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You as well. So that's Len Kuffert giving us some historical context to the tariff and trade wars. Kuffert is a history professor at the University of Manitoba. Well, with all the talks of tariffs and trade, a lot of you have been writing to us to say that let's not forget all of the other things that right now, because of the political climate and what's coming out of the States, there are a lot of other areas that we need to be exploring that could be threatened. And next on the podcast, we're going to hear all about that because a University of Manitoba research team that works on HIV and AIDS prevention care for sex workers in Nairobi is at risk of losing their funding. In fact, they believe they've already lost their funding from the U.S., that portion of it. That's because the Trump administration has been making huge cuts in government spending. They have been told they have a limited amount of time to figure out what they can do next without those funds. And as you're going to hear, there's all kinds of concerns about it. Julie Lajoie is an assistant professor in the Sex Hormones and Immunology Lab at the University of Manitoba. Here is our conversation about their concerns. Good morning.
Good morning.
So does all of your funding come from the States, Julie?
No, so the funding comes from different agencies. So mostly the Canadian Institute of Health Research, or CHR. Personally, I also get funding from CANFOR, so the Canadian Association Foundation for AIDS Research. But the clinical aspects, so the treatment for HIV, the prevention, the treatment for STI that we provide in Kenya in 9 clinics comes from PEPFAR, so the President really Fund for AIDS research. So that's come from the state. It's a $1.5 million a year that we have for operating 9 clinics that give prevention care for HIV, for STI, and treatment for a little bit over 50,000 people in Nairobi. Right now, as of right now, because yes, PEPFAR got a 90 days extension, but in Kenya, the fund were going through USAID, and USAID has been dismantled as of yesterday. We got told yesterday that we were no longer able to operate our clinics, which means that by Monday, our clinic have to be shut down. We are right now trying to see if there's a way to bypass USAID and get funding through another organization that the US government will allow, because there's a 90 days extension on PEPFAR, but we are in an emergency crisis.
How much of this is a Trump cut, or was your funding threatened before this administration came in?
The PEPFAR program is totally a Trump cut. We knew when Trump was reelected that we will most likely see some funding cut through PEPFAR due to some ideology on gay men or trans individual. But in his first mandate, he had renewed PEPFAR, saying that that was important, and acknowledged the work that was doing on HIV and how it was important for the US to continue providing that life-saving funding. But now we all know the situation is changing. We also know that there's a RFK Jr. that is trying to be the head of the health minister. We're saying that HIV doesn't cause AIDS, which is totally fake news, but it's a new world, and the pause was not expected.
How did you find out that you're going to lose this funding? Like, how were you informed?
It was said, last week we were all in Kenya for an annual meeting, collaborative meeting, And we saw the news that PEP4 was probably paused. Then we received an email saying that all activity was to be shut down the day after. Then we fight it back, and on the Friday we were told, okay, yes, there's a pause, but there's an exception to the pause that was signed, but nobody kind of communicated to the CDC, to other agencies. So we were told on Friday to send a notice of stop of employment to all our employees. Then on Monday, this Monday, we were told, okay, there's the exception, you can continue. And yesterday, USAID finally said, well, the funding comes through us, so you are shutting down.
What's it been like? I mean, did you follow through and inform employees then that they're out of work, that you stop programs? Like, what's this been like for you, and what's the fear like?
So right now, we are continuing until Monday based on the rules. We are trying to fight it. It is humanly unethical to stop our activities in Kenya, the clinical activities. So we're going to fight it to the bone. We're going to find a ways. The staff is for sure worried. But right now it's a question of when we talk. We had a community meeting on last Friday, and the question were like, what do I do? I'm pregnant right now. I'm a sex worker. I cannot access the publicity funding government facilities because of stigma, and it's not safe for me. But I'm living with HIV. If I don't have access to my drugs, my baby will probably be infected with HIV. I have a collaborator. She's a sex worker. She's on all my funding since I started a year and a half ago. She's been living with HIV for 20 years. She's been in the program for 25 years. She's telling me, I have 6 pills left at home. Next week, what happened to me when I'm running out of my pill that are helping me to maintain my viral load undetectable and then keeping me alive and healthy? What's going to happen to me? And it's heartbreaking question that we don't know how to address. We were certainly not thinking we will have to address those questions. And now we are in emergency, and we need to find solution to continue whatever it's by another organism will take over, by a GoFundMe that will help us continuing for at least a few weeks to few months until we figure things out. It's humanly impossible to stop. It's life of people, and then it's also, if the virus come back and those who are infected with HIV, they are going to transmit the virus, and then we're going to come back to HIV is not in control again, and we cannot let that happen after 45 years of fight against HIV to end HIV.
What you said there, I just wrote down to quote you. You said it's humanly unethical to stop, funding these activities in Kenya. What's your next step? Obviously, as you said, you're trying to find another funding source. You're not quite certain. You have until Monday to articulate this. But immediately today, what's your next step? Are you trying to plan meetings? And you said you're still pushing back. How are you still planning on pushing back against this?
Well, so the team in Nairobi right now, I can tell you, I just had a text. They are right now in communication with USAID and with UNAID. So we are trying right now to see how can we have that 90 days exception that were allowed by the government. We are funded by PEP4. We do understand that PEP4 funding was running to USAID in Kenya, but how can we bypass that right now for at least be able to operate for the 90 days? Otherwise, if that cannot happen, we are going to try to find whatever is by from us ourselves to put some money to continue the clinics a little bit longer. Some staff are paid by a research project. If there's no clinic, there's no research right now, but we do have some money to at least provide for funding for those employees that we were funding by research. We'll put them in their clinical work instead of research. So we'll do our best to continue as long as we can until we figure out a long-term way. But like I said, we cannot just stop the clinic. We might have to stop them for a few days, where we're going to try our best that within a week we can continue, even if it's limited activity, that we cannot provide all the service that at least those who need their HIV life-saving treatment and those who need prevention get it.
Trying to do something, as I said there, Julie Lajoie. Thank you very much for being with us and telling us about the situation you find yourself in. Appreciate having you on CBC.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
That's Julie Lajoie. She's an assistant professor in the Sex Hormones and Immunology Lab at the University of Manitoba. Well, thanks for listening to us today. As I always say, we try to make sense of the news in 20 minutes or less and how it impacts Manitobans, but I feel like we need longer than that, so it's a good thing this is a daily podcast. If you are someone that tunes in daily, please don't forget to like and share.